Okay, it's now prepping to go live on YouTube.
And I guess I'm going to hit the button to go live as well. Sound like a plan?
Give me a second. Okay, but now, yeah, you changed the screen share. Okay, good. All right, I am live on YouTube. And I will post the YouTube link in our page. So you're streaming too?
Not yet.
Okay.
I've got a weird image here. Let's see something here. Let's do that.
This is good. I like this much better.
This?
This is better than the one you had before.
Yeah. But I'm just not
Okay.
certain. I am live.
Okay. You are on which outlet?
Should be Facebook. It's automated to Facebook and YouTube.
Okay, so you're going to your Facebook profile?
I am going to go check that out right now.
And dear people, as you are watching this live, you're still getting a behind the scenes experience as the audio video team consisting of two very competent middle-aged white men are figuring out how this works.
Yeah, so I am live on Facebook and I have a viewer.
Yeah, that might be yourself or me. Who
Myself.
knows? Okay. So I wish I was a bit more competent in this, and I wish that Facebook were a little bit more flexible around this. But for now, Zoom and Facebook aren't talking the way we want them to, so we had to do some workarounds. So we are live on YouTube, and happy to have you here with us today. This is my friend, co-conspirator, colleague. I don't know what other nouns we can come up with. Joshua Betancourt, and I hope I'm saying your name right because I tend to butcher it. How do you say your name, Joshua?
It's you're on point. It's Betancourt, Joshua Betancourt.
Joshua Betancourt. There's some French in there and maybe some Spanish as well. So tell our audience where that name is from.
Yeah, you're spot on. It's French descent, but it also proliferated through kind of the Spanish culture, Spain, um, the Caribbean, Central America, South America. But for me, I hail from Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico.
Chicano, Puerto Rico. So first language, English or Spanish?
It's a
Or,
mix. It's
or
both.
both?
Yeah. I learned Spanish at home, but it was just integrated into this Spanglish conversational language that took place, growing up. But I, speak, read, write both languages.
Beautiful. So we have two bilingual folks here on, and but that's not the topic that we're going to discuss. So, in Joshua's video frame, you're going to see the new logo of the NLP Center of Atlanta. Back here, you see not the old logo of the center, but the old traditional NLP Association logo. And both Joshua and I are avid fans and practitioners and masters of NLP, neuro linguistic programming.
Yeah.
And we are not only streaming to our NLP tribe, we are streaming to our respective tribes because both Joshua and I have multiple streams of engagement, so to say, with people that we touch or that we connect with through work and outside of work. And when Joshua and I sat down last time to talk about human behavior, and this is what the culture talk is about: how we show up as people in the world, how we do things around here, how what is our culture and what shapes it. We came to an awareness that being male is quite a big factor in how people show up in the world. And as the conversation progressed, we quickly agreed that what it means to be a man may not always be seen as the same thing for everybody. And we announced this conversation around the buzzword of toxic masculinity, and it is a buzzword. So I don't want to exclude anybody. I don't want to make that label mean whatever you think it means. It's just one of the buzzwords out there. However, it's about how we define what it is to be a man. But Joshua, how would you frame our conversation?
I think you did a really good job. Yeah, it really is about kind of having an open discussion related to what some of the principles and ideals of being a healthy man is, right? And you're right, the buzzword toxic masculinity might carry some negative connotations. So, thanks for clarifying that. But I also think that it does a good job of providing somewhat of a framework around, some of the core issues related to, some of the things that we might have missed out on as Generation X and forward, right? So, but yeah, I think you did a really good job with framing it.
Thank you. So, in your world, your upbringing, you hail from the Latino culture. How
Mm.
have you become witness to masculinity that may not serve a well-formed purpose?
Yeah. So, my story is it's interesting in the sense that I grew up in a single parent household. It was just my mother. So that is, I don't know. I mean, it's relatively common these days, right? Just based on kind of all the statistics related to the success of relationships. So I think that, that's probably a component of it. But, because of that, my interaction with masculine figures, right, whether they were, uncles or cousins or what have you, was always, that in the sense of machismo. It's a very common thing in the Latin culture, right? So you've got to be strong, you don't show pain, all of those kind of traditional expectations of.
Let's not brush over this. I want to pinpoint this because it's easy to throw out this term machismo, and people have they think they have an understanding what that means. And in the outside of Latin world, machismo might be labeled as okay, those guys and their level of Latin lover masculinity. So it's easily put in one drawer of the big commode of labels. Um, how would you, as a man who grew up in a predominantly Latino culture, how did you experience machismo? What did it mean?
It meant to be confident, sometimes overly confident. It meant to be
Mhm.
a person who it was charismatic and was not afraid to engage in conversations or interactions with the opposite, with women, right? It meant that you had carried around this stigma of being a womanizer or a ladies' man or kind of successful in that way, but bravado in the sense that it also removed you from somewhat from the emotional connection that should be in place between a man and a woman, or in a relationship, and 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 this ideal of, I don't know, just masculine strength, and not necessarily connected to your emotions, I guess is how I would put it.
Oh, okay. So strength and control of emotions. Would those be two headlines that or two pillars that are important?
And I don't know, I wouldn't say control, I would say subdued emotions, right?
Mm.
Because even those men who adhere to this machismo mode of existence, they feel things. It's just they don't show them, right? So it's kind of like almost living in inauthentically.
Hmm. So the expectation, the societal or the cultural expectation of what a man should be like, the shoulding, um, makes it hard sometimes, or maybe more than sometimes, makes it hard for young adolescent men to find their true self, because their self is not allowed to blossom the way it's inside of them. Their true self has to be molded or shaped into that mold of machismo, or this is what a man is, and this is the role model, this is the societal expectation we have of you. Be that. No, don't be this.
Right. No, yeah, I couldn't agree more, right? I think that, and most people can probably, most men can probably relate to this in the sense that, as you're growing up, your circle of friends, they encourage you, right, to be as strong as possible and, reach out and talk to as many people as possible. And even though you might, have your eyes or intent focused in a particular direction, it's kind of trying to be, as open to as many opportunities as present themselves, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think that there is this component of, this society's pressure to conceal what it is that you might really be feeling, and
Mm.
not necessarily connect with, the vulnerability of what emotions really are and how they should be reflected towards other people.
Well, wait a minute. Vulnerability? You mean showing that I'm not invincible? How
Exactly.
dare you?
Exactly.
I would give up my superpower.
Right.
Obviously, I'm facetious here. Um, I've and I think it's important to make that point. So you're from the Latino culture of the Americas. I am from German culture and that of Europe. And for me, in my upbringing, there was also a certain expectation of what it is to be a man, and those expectations morphed a little bit as I grew up. I think they changed with the generations, and I think it depends on really what greater historic and societal um, what's the word, context we find ourselves in. So just to give you a big quick backdrop for those of you who don't know me that well. So I'm the firstborn son. I'm the first of two sons, actually. So my parents had another male offspring, but I'm the first of two sons. And my father, I was born in 1970 in Germany, in what was then West Germany, so the free democratic side of the country. And my father was born in 1944. And in 1944, in Europe, that means World War II. This means bombs flying from the sky, destroying everything. This
Right.
means the war that Germany started and that Germany lost, thank goodness. However, my father was born into a world that was destroyed, in a world of deprivation and post-war rebuilding, and also a world of shame, or unacknowledged shame, of Nazi crimes,
Gotcha.
which is also important because my father did not have a male role model, or he did not. No, let me correct that. He did have a male role model. He did. My father didn't. My father never had his dad. So
Okay.
my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was a soldier in the German military, and he fought for the wrong cause, and he never made it home. He got killed on the Eastern Front. Nobody knows where he's buried.
Oh, no. Sorry to
We
hear
don't
that.
even know if he was. We don't even know if he was buried properly. So here we are, my father growing up in the 1940s and 50s, and his role model of what it means to be a man was his grandfather, a man who was born in the 1800s,
Right.
a man who was born into a society where um, gender roles and hierarchies were quite different than they were in the 1950s in Germany. And that is not just my father's story. This is an entire generation story. That part of German history is where people grew up in what's called the fatherless generation.
Yeah.
So this is a circumstance that is fairly unique to a certain period in time, and it's certainly unique to the German history or the Central European history. However, my dad, who raised me and modeled to me what it's like to be a man, his role model was somebody from a different century. So
Wow.
my experience of obedience, authority, um, well, hiding or controlling emotions, showing strength, or whatever aspects of masculinity may play a role. This was portrayed to me from somebody who learned from a different century, from a century ago. So my upbringing, as I'm a Gen Xer, so my upbringing as a male, as a white male, was quite different from the upbringing of most white males that I met in the United States. So we think, okay, we look alike, I speak English, we can communicate well, and with similar socioeconomic means, and yet my role model of what it's like to be a man is often significantly different from that of my white peers in the United States. And
Yeah, of course.
I point out ethnicity because it matters. Most African American males, they have a completely different experience, and I think most Latino males do as well.
Yeah.
So ethnicity matters, socioeconomic context matters, what time in history you were born in, and family history you were born into, all of these things matter. And that's one of the reasons why I look at the role of, or the gender roles, from a slightly different angle than the gender studies, probably, because I'm the culture guy, right? I look at how people behave based not only on their personality but also on their cultural context. And for me, machismo does not necessarily mean toxic. Machismo means it is being a man in a cultural context that for a large part of that society seems to work, and it can pendulum swing uh, into a more toxic side of things. But machismo doesn't necessarily have to be negative, or does it, Joshua?
Yeah, I don't think it has to be. No, I mean, quite, and just based on my experience, quite often it does become that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, right? Now, there certainly are, examples of integrity that still embody the idea of machismo, for sure.
Hmm. And as we were talking, I was like, when did we as a society even start thinking about these changing roles of genders? And I'm not sure. I'm not a gender studies person, and those who are out there who are watching this might just rip me a new one after this. But in the way I imagine it to be is like, when women finally got control over her bodies and were able to regulate whether they want to reproduce or not,
Right,
that gave women the physical freedom to pursue things that they were not allowed to or unable to pursue in the past because they were either pregnant or raising their offspring.
right,
So now women have the ability to regulate if and how much they want to be a mom and a parent, or not, if they want to pursue things that were or used to be for humankind, history of humankind, were reserved for men.
yeah.
Am I missing something here?
I think you're right on point, and I would add to that. I think the industrial revolution and technological advancement has changed the landscape of how we live our lives to the point where we weren't really prepared for the outcome, or the what's the word that I'm looking for? Basically how things progressed as it related to the gender roles, right? Because
Mm,
once the traditional role of provider and caretaker, right? Once those lines blurred because of all of the advancements related to the Industrial Revolution, right? And we weren't out at the river washing clothes on a washboard, right? Those functions slowly began to dissipate into an automated version. And even now, more so with technology, is that it's more about this individual contributor, right? Both
yeah.
male and female. So
Right.
so in that, I don't think we really did a good job as being able to still hold on to kind of those principles that were in place before, or not necessarily hold on to them, but maybe mold them to a place where we had a better understanding of how to interact with one another, how to communicate with one another, and what the dependencies were going to be related to how the relationships move forward. And I
Mm.
still think that we're working all of those details out now, right?
Yeah, we are. And I think, I mean, despite, and we both live in the United States, and despite the fact that the US still has a notable gender inequality in terms of
Oh,
equal
yeah.
pay or access to resources um, or just basic rights for females. I mean, look, going
Yeah.
from state to state here in the United States, how much a woman is in control of what her body is supposed to do and not can change from state as you change across state lines. Um, However, I do want to acknowledge that compared to other societies, the United States has made big strides in closing that gender gap as much as possible up to now. Sure, we're nowhere near, and I'm
Right.
going to be the last one to defend what's going on in this country in terms of gender inequality.
Agreed.
However, I grew up in a time where in the 70s and 80s in Germany, when gender inequality was a given and wasn't even really questioned, aside from um, a, a small and then growing minority in the women's rights movement. But I grew up with a father that was quite authoritarian, a father that was quite dominant in his decision making, both as the head of the family and the household, and also as a small business owner, a family owned business,
Right.
where my mom was involved in the business, my grandmother, my dad's mom was involved in the business, and yet he was the sole decision maker, and nobody was questioning that. And I don't want to portray myself here as a feminist. However, as in my coming of age period, in my puberty and adolescence, being the firstborn son, I was probably the first one ever to challenge my father in that role.
Yeah.
And I had, and this is my this is my personality. I have a strong desire for justice, and whenever I feel that there is injustice, I get very, well, let's say, belligerent, right? So I won't let that rest. So which led to a lot of conflicts between my father and me. Um, Not that I was out to defend women or give women more power, influence, whatever. I just felt injustice. It might as well have been injustice against a male, but I just thought I need to stand up to my dad. This isn't right.
Right.
Um, and that's where I, for the first time, experienced the toxicity of what manhood can be, right?
Right.
And we named this dad-like virility or deadly virus. So we're now in a time of coronavirus and COVID-19 pandemic. How how is the negative side of masculinity showing up currently, right? So uh, I don't have the numbers. I don't know if you have, Joshua, but I've seen reports on cases of domestic violence, reported domestic violence, skyrocketing now in times of shelter in place and isolation and lockdown. So these are the reported numbers that are spiking. So we all know that there is a number in the darkness that won't get reported. So we can only assume how bad it must be by now. Um, what's your personal experience around this? Have you lived in an environment where you saw men take advantage of women or men taking advantage of their privilege of power?
Yeah, I have. Um, it was, I wouldn't say it was a common thing, but, it was certainly there. Actually in close family, right? Within the family with some uncles, and then, friends who, you know, had come up in similar circumstances without, the proper guidance and a father figure, and didn't really have
Mm,
their hands wrapped around, how to deal with their emotions and how to manage
hmm
relationships. So
hmm
yeah, you're right. I've seen the reports and some of the articles about how, yeah, COVID-19 has led to, more telephone calls into local police precincts about, domestic issues, which is
Right.
sad. And also, which is kind of an important, um, it's an indicator of the importance of being able to have this conversation, right? Because I think
Right.
that no one wants to be in a relationship that turns painful, right? No one wants to be in a relationship that turns, I don't know if toxic's the right word, but domestic, I guess is the right word to say. And I just don't believe that um, the lower income or middle class, male has had proper education or has the information to understand how to counter, some of the issues that might be coming up.
And this is where I was hoping we would go to, and this is the rabbit hole that I was hoping one of us will open up. I wondered for the longest time as I became an adult. I wondered for the longest time because my sense of justice had no respect for inequality. My sense of justice always was wondering how come it is this way. This doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And um, I think the only answer that I could come up with is it's the educational background, right? It's what are these young boys and young men fed? What role models are they exposed to, and what are their male role models telling them um, their manhood should be like? And certainly, the way I grew up to be a man was different from the boys I met in the U.S. And I was 17 when I first experienced that. I was an exchange student in the United States. It's the first time I came to this country, and the boys behaved differently than I did, the same age. And I'm like, what's going on? Why are you so more aggressive and more assertive? And why do you chase girls the way you do? And why are you using derogatory language when you talk to fellow males about women? Um, I found that highly inappropriate. And I found that not only inappropriate, I found that um, in cultural terms, I found that not normal. I found that a very unfamiliar, unknown behavior to me that I couldn't make sense of for the longest time. Did you experience something of that nature when you moved from Puerto Rico to the mainland of the United States?
I was born in Florida.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but I do resonate with what you're saying, and it's evident in the fabric of society. I mean, if you listen to popular music, right, and you listen to kind of the lyrics that are contained within hip hop music and that culture, which is a huge part of the culture here in the United States, it's just accepted as you know it's just common behavior to carry that and I've got to say it, that toxic masculine aura about yourself, right? Where you are derogatory towards the opposite sex, and it doesn't just go, I mean, it goes in both directions, right? I mean, it's just, it's, yeah, evident in our society and the way that our culture has, developed over the last, I would say over the last 20 years, probably since the
Well,
90s.
it might just go in both directions, which I don't really know because I refuse to go to female bathrooms. However, the or locker rooms for that matter, because
Yes,
the so-called locker room talk. But I think it's a difference whether I speak derogatorily from a position of privilege and power, or whether I speak derogatorily from a position of knowing that I am the quote unquote weaker sex, or the gender that has
mm,
less influence and less access. So that might be a defense mechanism, whereas this is just exerting dominance.
right.
And and this display of male or perceived male dominance that I experienced as a 17-year-old coming to the US, I'm like, nope, I'm not having this. And this expressed itself in
Yeah.
some minor incidents. For example, the consumption of alcohol,
Yes.
which isn't necessarily a gender thing. However, it became one. So in most European countries, the alcohol regulations are different than they are in the US. My country, 16 for beer and wine, 18 for hard liquor. So I come to the United States or to a state, and back then Minnesota had drinking age 21 at that age at that time already. So the team members of the school tennis team, we went on a trip, and in the car, 5 people, and the one guy says, "Who's got the best fake ID? We're going to make a stop at the package store." And I was like, "Fake ID? What's going on?" No, I don't. I'm not. I'm not part of the. No, no, we're buying stuff. So they bought beer and sodas and liquor to mix with, and they got, forgive my crass language, they got shit faced.
Yeah.
And they were egging me on to keep up with them, and I was still nursing my first beer. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, folks. I'm still good with my first beer. I don't have a need to get drunk.
Right.
However, it was so ingrained in them that they needed to be full grown men by breaking the law, in the US context, being an individual, being a rebel, being against government in a way, and also doing something that would prove to each other how strong they are, how physically able they are, how much they can handle the booze, and and be be confident in spite of their fear of getting caught. All
Yeah.
of this was a weird mix of um, out. What's the word? One upping each other,
Yeah.
and finding the alpha in the group. And
Yeah.
I was there, not alpha, not beta. I was like Zeta with my can of beer and my tall boy. I'm like, what the hell's
What's
going on?
happening? What's
I
happening?
I don't need to play this game. Where I come from, I can have this legally, so I don't know what you're doing. So I was completely lost in their game of who's got the biggest male ego, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I absolutely can relate. I mean, I remember being subject to kind of social pressure and peer pressure around alcohol. I remember being kind of ridiculed and having my sexuality questioned if I wasn't, being that aggressive, guy who was pursuing all of these girls, or if, if there was an opportunity to be with a girl and I didn't take it, it was the joke was on me, right? So it
Mm,
is something that has been probably for many years ingrained into the mindset and the mentality of the young American male, right? And I think that is across each ethnicity within the United States, and probably something that's consistent across the world. So no, I can 100% relate that, if you weren't drinking as much as everyone else, you were a punk, right?
yeah.
If you weren't taking advantage of that girl that wanted to date you, you were a punk. And
Right.
and that was pretty consistent, just growing up. And I think by and large it's related to, or it was more prevalent in young men who didn't have a strong authoritative father figure, right? Who didn't have guidance and leadership around, what's the appropriate way to behave, what's the appropriate way to conduct yourself in those situations.
Well, is that the case? Because I did have that dad,
You did, but
and
and it showed in the sense that you weren't playing that game, right? Right.
he wasn't playing the game, but I still questioned him. I challenged his authority, which he didn't like much. So he probably wanted me to man up in many cases. So I wasn't manly enough for my dad in on many occasions.
Gotcha.
And I just questioned his standards of, how is that manly? You're just being you're a fool. You
So,
you you're pretending to be strong, or you think you. I remember, I think it was 16 when he tried to reprimand me for something, how I broke the rules, and he was slapping me, and I was 16, and I told him to his face, so that's all you got.
wow.
That did you run out of things to say? So
Yeah.
slapping me was your last remorse because you're clueless how else you're going to resolve this.
Handle it.
So this was, I mean, this was a big moment for my dad and I, and it took a long time to repair that. But
Wow.
he must have been conscious of his inability to parent, and I certainly was at that age. That he's like, okay, so this, you don't have the language, or you don't have the behavior to express your emotions in a way that it would be useful guidance for your oldest son. All you can
Right.
do is physical punishment. And to me, that felt toxic. And
Yeah.
I would argue, and we've discussed this since. I mean, my dad and I, we get along just fine by now. But he was at his wits' end. He ran out of tools in his parental toolbox.
And it goes to show that it's a systemic generational issue, right? And that goes back much further than we really can grasp, right? Because it's not just my nieces and nephews who are dealing with it now. It was me. I was dealing with it, and I'm sure that in some form or fashion, your father, right? So
Mm.
it's an illustration of how long the path of trajectory of this getting us to the point where we're at today, right? Which is far from where I would think would be ideal as far as, having powerful relationships and those types of things.
I think, and I might be naive, and you call me a libtard all you want, or if that's the lingo you use to deal with people who you don't agree with, which should tell you that um, if that's you, then by that definition that you may hold, then I am a libtard. Um, but I think the misconception is here that if, as a man, I give more rights to women, or as the white majority, if I give more rights to marginalized groups of my society, or whoever cedes some of their privilege, it does not mean you give up who you are. And I think this is often the misconception, by you not chasing tail as it presented itself to you, or by not drinking, or whatever man game was put in front of you. If you if you don't play that game, that doesn't make you less of a man. You're Nobody's taken away from your manhood if you don't want to play that game. You're
Right.
just a man as you are. And it's the same with same-sex marriage. People are arguing, well, um, that is messing with the sanctity of matrimony and marriage. Well, like, it doesn't affect my marriage to my wife if women out there get married to each other, men get married to each other. If you don't like gay marriage, don't get married to the same gender. If you don't like being a toxic man, or if then don't be that person. You're
Right.
still a man. And I think this is what is getting us into trouble as societies, more than once, is thinking that if we're going through a change, or a change of power, or if we're readjusting who can do what, that we're taking away from one group to give it to another. I don't think that's the case. Um, and I don't want to make this about a race talk in the United States, but I read an article yesterday in regards to COVID, and the response by certain states in the United States. And this a white gentleman who wrote this article about pandemic king while white, he said the only way to end social injustice is to fight white privilege, and to fight white dominance. And the same could be said of male dominance. The only way you can end it is to actually, as a male, to be an advocate for taking away male dominance, because women
Yeah.
by themselves have fought for it, but I don't think that's enough. I think it's up to us men to say, I don't want this anymore, because it's not serving me, and neither is it serving the women in my life.
No, yeah, I agree. Um, I I think this issue goes back to kind of emotional literacy, and how that's not something
Hmm.
that is um, how that's not a subject that we're educated on, right? It's we're left to figure that one out on our own, right? And because of that, we start to see kind of the ramifications of how we behave as a gender. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I was reading an article earlier today about, I can't remember what country it was, but there was a woman at the head of the leadership within that country, and their response to COVID-19 was completely different than
Yeah.
most of the rest of the world, right? So they have a huge leg up, and far fewer cases, and many more controls in place, and a faster response, because for us, our and maybe this isn't the right analogy, but men were problem solvers, and the idea is, how do we ensure that we provide and have security. So that kind of really lends itself to the culture here that is a capitalist culture, right? And instead of whereas women innately have more of this mentality of how to nurture and how to care for, which is something that, well, in the United States, we're missing a whole hell of a lot, right? People are more concerned
Well,
with the
the
bottom
US
line.
are a fairly masculine society, but in terms of cultural comparison. But I mean, we can oversimplify, right? Um, if we're confronted with a problem, go back to the early times of humanity. The men go out and fight the saber-toothed tiger and kill the mammoth, and that's an act of aggression or an act of fight. Whereas the women protect the fire in the cave and make sure that the kids are safe. So those are the traditional gender role models in a way, and men seem to have this urge to go into fight, and women take a different approach. And this is not just one country that you read about. There are many case studies out there now. There's a couple of countries around the world, well-developed countries in the world, that have female leadership. New Zealand, Taiwan, Germany, Finland, Norway, I believe Iceland still has a female head of government.
Yeah.
And all these countries with a female head of government seem to do much better with this COVID situation. Go figure.
Yeah. Go figure. It's interesting. You know,
You said we as men probably don't have the emotional education. How when did you, as a young boy or a man, become aware of your emotions? How when did you discover them, and when did you come to terms with them?
yeah. Yeah. This is going to be a hard-hitting story right now. So I'm going to be
Okay.
completely honest with you. It wasn't until I was approaching my divorce, and it's probably 7 8 years ago, 8 years ago,
Hmm.
where I really came to the realization, because I was in a relationship for 13 years, and we were married for 11 of those years, almost 11 of those years. And I was very, very immature and very, very, you know, self-motivated, and kind of I still had a lot of growing up to do. And because of that,
Hmm.
I wasn't available emotionally to really contribute to the relationship in order to salvage it. And there was still, I'm a man, right? I'm a man, so kind of externally motivated. And
Hmm.
so that, a lot of that contributed to uh, the divorce, but also to this process of having to come to the realization of ownership of who it was that I was going to be. And so subsequently, I had another relationship after that, that was destructive and toxic. And in that, going through that experience kind of drove me to um, having to do this internal work, right? And really taking advantage of the information that was out there, actually going out and seeking the information that was out there relative to healing and to growing and to expanding and acceptance, and that emotional literacy that we were talking about. So yeah, just
And
within the last 8 years.
and I don't think you're a unicorn in that. I think a lot of us men have a very late waking up moment with our emotions, and maybe some of us never do. Who knows? And men don't talk about their feelings much, or do we?
We don't. I mean, we just don't, right? It's not accepted, commonly accepted behavior, right? It's the idea is hey, we've got to ball it up, crumble it up, leave it inside, and put on the strong face and go about and continue to tackle the world. But what people don't realize is that those little wounds and those little cuts, they build up over time. And if you don't address them, if you don't take some type of action in order to resolve them, then they'll eventually rear their ugly heads in your future relationships or your future situations.
Yeah, they'll bring up the toxicity, right?
I mean, yeah, ultimately the cause of it, because it's just unaddressed emotional wounds that you're carrying around. And then
Mm.
also the illiteracy aspect of it is that we don't know how to communicate well. We don't know how to set a space. We don't know how to listen well, right? We're more concerned about, the things that we're feeling and the things that we're experiencing, as opposed to, as NLP would say, looking at it from a systemic standpoint and taking a step out of the system to get that third person perspective on it. So,
Mm.
there's these wonderful, beautiful tools and educational opportunities for growth and for healing. But I think part of it is, one, it's not something that's readily available to most people. And then the second part of it is how many guys are really pursuing it. They're more concerned with how they've accustomed themselves to living their experience out, right? Which is when
When was the first time? When was the first time you really let go in front of a man? When you, I don't know, cried, or when you let them peek into your closet of demons?
this is uh, So I had a
And
pretty, I had a, no, this is fine. I had a pretty rough childhood, and and a lot of people say that, but like my older brother, my adopted brother, wound up in prison for life, and so we were definitely walking down the wrong path, right? And it was everything that you could imagine, right? Alcohol, drugs, you name it. And there was a time where I'll never forget this memory. I spent, my loyalty to my family was questioned in a very,
oh,
very severe way, right?
uh-huh.
And you kind of imagine what that scenario looks like. But yeah, my loyalty as far as whether or not I could be trusted to my family was questioned, and I was in a house, locked up in a house for probably 36 to 40 hours, just being confronted about this. And it was brutal. It was a brutal experience. And that was probably the first time where I had this really powerful, you know, e- experience around, the definition of loyalty and trust. And even though it was in a very turbulent and toxic environment, right? It certainly taught me a great lesson about, you know, um, how we present ourselves to the world, and who what family means and what trust means and what loyalty means in the face of those circumstances. So that was probably the first time. And then most recently, this last severe breakup where I found myself surrounded by family, and had some pretty deep emotional moments there about letting go and kind of releasing and healing related to
Mm.
the loss of that relationship. So
And I think it's a similar story for most of us. And it was, I mean, for me, what is it now, 2020? I think it was in, well, the first moment where I truly recognized my inadequacy as a human being in the greater scheme of things was when our first daughter was born.
oh wow.
I was there in the delivery room when I saw what type of physical stress and pain a female body is able to handle,
Yeah.
and how useless, how utterly useless I was in that moment. My
Yeah.
job was done 40 weeks before that. I had
Yeah.
nothing that I could have done in that moment could have changed the outcome. My wife would go on to tell me, yeah, but the fact that you were there was emotional stability, blah, blah, blah. Sure, I'll take it. Thank you, honey. The outcome without me would still have been the same. I have
Right.
no question about
Right.
that. And then it wasn't until I went on my journey of self development, getting in touch with neurolinguistic programming was one part of it. Yes, so the psychology of human behavior, and until I had some breakthrough experiences in a safe space in a group of people on a similar path of learning, and that started for me in 2013.
Wow.
I was already in my 40s, so you guys do
Yeah.
the math. I don't know if I don't think I'm especially old on that path or young, or for doesn't really matter. I think the fact that you and I had an experience like this that led us to open up about our emotions or becoming more emotionally literate
Yeah.
is what matters first. And I don't know about you, but I know a whole lot of men in my life, whether it's in my family, my friend circle, no, not my friend circle, my circle of friends, or amongst business connections, where I have the feeling these men never broke up in front of others.
Yeah.
They've been bottling it for a long time, and it's not serving them. Haven't you made similar experiences?
I do, and it brings up a great topic in the sense that I don't think that we turn towards our pain. We usually turn away from it, right? And it's one of those situations where if we really want to go through this evolutionary change, if we really want to pursue growth and expansion, that we have to turn towards the things that hurt us and confront them and face them, head on, right?
Hmm.
Otherwise, we're at the mercy of this subconscious either belief or behavior that continues to present itself in our relationships and in our interactions and in our communication with other people. So I think it's important to take that idea of turning towards the things that hurt you, turning towards the things that scare you, and facing them, and realizing that, you're so much more powerful than you know, as far as your ability to overcome those either illusions or concerns or fears or beliefs. And again, it's just a matter of,
And is this possibly the way we're built as humans? I don't know. This may be a philosophical question, but women have the ability to bear children, so they can't turn away from that pain. If they become mothers, there will be some level of pain, and it's somehow ingrained in either in their upbringing and part of their DNA, maybe nurturing and nature, that they know that there will be pain, and that there's no way to run from it. And men traditionally adopted a, yeah, I can walk away from this pain, I could just subdue it with some other activity,
yep,
because otherwise we would have never gone into battle. Men would never go into a war,
yeah,
right? um I don't know, this might be a bit too up there, I don't know. This is totally unrehearsed, but I think the question for me is, and we're heading towards the hour, the question for me is, you're a father, I'm a father, I have two daughters, you have a son and a daughter, right?
that's right. Yeah.
So how do we raise emotionally literate children in order not to pass on that toxicity?
Yeah. I think it starts with listening, and that applies to listening to yourself, right? And being aware
Mm,
of that internal dialogue that's going on within yourself, and being a platform, and that structure of stability, so that our children understand and have confidence that they can come to us with anything. So the judgment aspect of it has to dissolve, right? The disciplinarian aspect of it has to dissolve. This superiority concept related to, how we envision raising our children has to dissolve, and it has to be more along the lines of something where there's this mutual loving relationship about growth, right? And about the exploration of what this thing, life, is all about, right?
mm.
If you start to take that approach, then you'll see that, the communication between you and your children, it flowers, right? It unfolds in a way that is significantly better.
How old is your son?
My son's 6, and my daughter is 9. And I'll tell a quick story really quick. But
Mm, mm-hmm.
since as long as I can remember, there was this inspirational video that I saw. And in summary, what it was about was, accepting, and being an expression of love for your children, regardless of anything that they've ever done, right? And the outcome of it was, there's nothing you can ever do to make me love you any less. There's absolutely nothing that you can ever do to make me love you any less. It doesn't matter what it is. There's nothing, there's nothing, there's nothing. And I
Mm.
have consistently said that statement to my children over and over and over and over again. And because of it, even, my 9-year-old daughter, she'll tell me about little boys that she likes, right? Because she feels that there's this space of trust in communicating with me. Um, and I think that's a good starting point, right? I think,
Mm.
trying to create that type of environment for, and it doesn't have to be your children, right? It can be, if you're kind of a role model, or if you're, at the, whatever, Boys and Girls Club of America, or what have you, like just being that type of sounding board and platform for young people who are trying to find their way is really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and even more so for your relationships, for your intimate and personal relationships, right? You've got to do the same.
So when your son comes to you after he did something, let's say, let's label that as something stupid, masculine,
Yeah.
no matter what that would be, and he would come to you and say, "Well, Dad, but didn't you say that you love me no less regardless?" So is that going to be an excuse?
No, no, no. He there. It's not a free pass to misbehave. It's not a free pass to make mistakes. You still have to reprimand mistakes and acknowledge that, hey, this is not the right way to be. But it is a it is a space so that they can be courageous enough to come and admit those mistakes, and in doing so,
Hmm.
grow and learn. It happened not too long ago where my young boy, um, I think he threw something and happened to hit my daughter, and didn't own it at first, and kind of tried to blame it on playing and all of these things. But he came forward and he said, "Hey, this happened, right?" So
Mm.
it's not an excuse to make a mistake or to continually make repeated mistakes. You still have to correct the behavior, but it does provide a space of communication that is probably missing. And to be honest with you, I mean, reactionary parents would probably get angry and punish, right? Reprimand before
Yeah,
before talking through it. And I think that's a
true,
that's a big problem too.
true. And I think having emotionally literate parents is where it starts. My wife, she owns a school. She started a Montessori school from scratch, and she uses a line that maybe she didn't invent, but she heard it, and it fits for most educators, I believe, especially for educators in the younger years, for preschool, elementary years. Um, and she says, "Well, I love going to work, and it's not the kids that get to me; it's the parents. School would be fun if it weren't for the parents." And being able to give parents the emotional literacy and allowing them to approach parenthood in a way that doesn't have to repeat the patterns of the past is a constant practice, right? And
Yeah,
this is why we do the work we do, you and I, right? This is why we engage with NLP. This is why we offer courses or offer experiences to our tribe, to give them the tools, to give them a safe space where they can be okay with their emotions and find ways and outlets to channel them in a way that are not held against them in a negative way or in an accusatory way. It's a way to let go of some baggage, right?
yeah.
And become more aware of one's own emotional framework.
No, you're 100% on point. And I couldn't uh, I, I couldn't be more of a supporter to the work, right? And I couldn't express more gratitude for yourself and your wife in the NLP Center. It really is uh, it has the potential to alter your life, right?
Yeah.
If you apply yourself and you apply, the work, and you do the work, it absolutely can change your life for the better. And
It did with mine. I know for sure it did with mine.
100%. I'm a
Yeah.
testimonial to that, right? It's 100% has
Yeah.
changed my life just in the last few years, because of kind of really getting a grasp on how to see things from a different perspective, and how to
And
kind of.
it's funny because we're parents and we're both past our 40 year mark, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
are,
we
I
are.
guess, right?
Hmm.
Even though we don't look it. So in case you're wondering how is that possible,
You
it's good
don't look good
it's
at all.
good nutrition, it's workout, and it's just a good genes. Um but it's a role that I reluctantly accepted over the years because I didn't feel that old. Because in my mind I was still 23. And
Yeah,
sometimes I still feel that way.
yeah,
And now there's other young men coming to me for input or advice or whatever, or in this case, let's call it what it is, coaching and
right,
mentoring.
right.
And I feel a heightened sense of responsibility in helping younger men find themselves in a world where being less toxic and less aggressive and less combative as a man doesn't take away from their manhood. In fact, it will make them more of a man.
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, and it's something that we desperately need in this world, right?
Yeah.
It's something that we desperately need.
So we're getting close to the hour, so I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I know these are weird times. thanks for being on. Thanks for following this. If you're watching the recording, I hope you got some value out of it. Feel free to post in the comment box, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever you're catching this. Feel free to get in touch with Joshua or myself if you want to further that conversation, or if you want some pointers as to how you can, I don't know, change or adjust the course of your journey. It doesn't have to be a full-fledged change. It could be just 1 degree further this way or that way. That might yield a significantly different outcome in the future. So, whatever you're preparing for during these unreal, surreal times of isolation and spatial and physical distancing, let's not become socially distant, because we're still interacting with each other, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Or if you just so desire, we can certainly throw you off the chasm, right? If that's if that's what you're interested in doing as well.
Yeah, we can do that too.
We can do
All
that
right.
too. We can do that too.
Joshua, thank you for your time.
Uh,
You're a good man. I know that because I've seen it in action. I've seen you with your kids, and this is what you want to model. And thanks for being one of the good guys.
Yeah, likewise, man. The same right back at you. Thank you for having me. This is super, super cool, and I look forward to future discussions.
All right.
Yeah,
Thanks everybody. The Culture Talk on masculinity, not toxic, just being a man.
just being a man.
The okay guy, right? The one that you would like to hang out with.